Hello Wargamers and happy holidays. Recently I was going through some of my old stuff and I found a collection of old White Dwarf magazines. Now, while I did go through all those old magazines and have a little bit of nostalgia trip of my own, I thought it'd be fun to look at some of these older magazines, some of the more influential ones, as a way of comparing where we were to where we are and where we're going. And to start off, I want to look at this particular one. It's from February 2002, and it's right in the midst of the High Elf release for that time. Now, keep in mind, this is back when we would get, just a couple of armies getting touched on per year, not this rapid release schedule that we have today. So there were, several White Dwarf magazines, which again at the time was a monthly publication. Several White Dwarfs touching on High Elves pretty heavily. And this is one of them. But in addition to talking about High Elves, it also has something that a lot of people are a big fan of, including myself, and that was chapter approved, and in this case, Kroot Mercenaries. So figured it'd be fun if we looked at it and went through. So just a general overview of the magazine, right? So we have the front cover, a bunch of Warhammer and 40K stuff in here, and then what's this? Oh my. Yes, it's actually not a printing error, but at the time, White Dwarf split their magazine in two to dedicate the first 2/3 of the magazine to their standard games, and then the back third of the magazine to Lord of the Rings. And in order to keep those two things separate, they printed the Lord of the Rings stuff upside down, which was pretty disorienting the first time it happened, but nonetheless, it did a pretty good job of keeping the two different product lines separate in the magazine. Eventually, they switched over to having them be both in the same orientation, but that was later on. So, yeah. So we open it up. We kind of get the standard introductory stuff, and then we get right into a bunch of fluff with the new High Elf release, talking about Dragon Princes, Masterclass of Teslas, and Emmerich. Okay, so those at the time were some pretty nice models, and they still hold up, but they're not the same design quality as the ones that we get today, of course. Then a bunch more fluff about High Elves and Dwarves with the War of the Beard, Skaven stuff, and then we get into something that we'd never see today, and that is Warhammer Chronicles, which is kind of like chapter approved, for Dogs of War, which at the time were a special set of units and characters that could be taken by any Warhammer army. So you could take, if I played Wood Elves, I could take individual characters or units from this. They were just mercenaries that you could take, and it added a nice little bit of fluff and versatility to armies if you so choose. So if you're a fan of dwarves or halflings, you could bring those into your army even if you didn't play them, using those rule sets, and that was pretty cool. Then we have a battle report that lasts quite a bit. And then we get into some of the stuff that we would see more today, and that is product placement. But something that I want to point out here, of course they have the new High Elf kits, point out some of the recent army books, which at the time were $20. They were paperback, but still $20. Not too bad of a price, but look at this, $75 for the entire starter kit for Warhammer Fantasy. That includes the book, the templates, measuring sticks, which, whatever, but they're there, a piece of terrain, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 units for $75. Crazy, huh? So, yeah, things were cheaper then, which pretty much everything was, but especially Warhammer, huh? But then to the thing we're all here to look at, chapter approved for Kroot Mercenaries. So it starts off with a nice bit of fluff talking about how Kroot are part of the Tau Empire, as we know, but they also rely heavily on gene flow from outside the Empire to keep their population strong. And because of that, there are Kroot that act as mercenaries for other armies. So you could be outside Tau space and hire some Kroot to work for you. And this provides rules for doing that on the Hush Hush. So there are some armies that can't take Kroot Mercenaries, including Space Marines, Necron, Sisters of Battle, Tyranids, and yes, Tau, because these guys are disobeying the Empire, so Tau Empire cannot take Kroot Mercenaries. And if you are running them as mercenaries, you have limited number of options you can take from this basic codex, right? So chapter approved basically gives you a set of rules to use as a codex. The second option that you could do would be to field these as a complete army on their own, which is kind of neat. Back then, you used strategy rating to help determine who was going to go first. And so Kroot had a special modified strategy rating where it was dependent on a dice roll as opposed to being a static number like it is for most armies. They have a rule called Eaters of the Dead, which basically means that they have to consolidate because they are going to be eating bodies in order to consume their DNA, which I think is really interesting. Overall here, it really makes the Kroot feel a lot more like gene stealers in fluff than anything else, which is pretty neat. But that's always been part of their fluff too, is that Kroot, like gene stealers, take on the traits of the prey that they consume and benefit from that. So that's one of the big things about Kroot, is that they would have to stick around and eat the dead. Fieldcraft basically gives them improved cover save. They're still infiltrators. They have units with hounds and Krootox. This is a cool special rule that Kroot hounds used to have. Basically, while Kroot themselves are going to stick behind and eat their prey, the Kroot hounds will automatically pursue enemies that are fleeing and will hit them on a strength, or hit them automatically with a strength 4 hit when they flee. Krootox basically are set up to be like oxen, basically, and so the real thing with Krootox were that they had toughness 3 for instant death purposes. So if you hit them with a strength 6 weapon, you would kill the rider, and once the rider was dead, the Krootox itself would just kind of wander off. And then they have a bunch of different special rules that you can take. Bold would be something that you could take to make your Kroot have a higher leadership. Chameleon gives them a 6-up cover save. Fast reflexes gives them +1 initiative. Nocturnal gives them the ability to reroll the dice when determining how far they can see with night vision, which again worked very differently back when this was produced. Or they could be orc hybrids. Basically, eating a bunch of orcs makes you stronger, so they could be they could have a toughness of 4 as opposed to toughness of 3. They could take 6 Sense, which makes them harder to hit as well, with blast templates and flamer templates. Right. So those are Army Special Rules. Pretty neat. But other than that, it's pretty limited as far as what you can do. They have a few special warrior options, which have some value, but they have very few weapon options. You can see it's a lot of stuff from other armies, like a boltless pistol, a slugga, shoota, melt-a-gun, plasma gun, and that's again because they're taking weapons from the people that employ them or from their prey. So it makes sense that they're having kind of these common weapons. But as far as Kroot-specific weapons, there's the Kroot rifle and Kroot gun, which we still have today. And then there's the Kroot hunting rifle, which is actually the predecessor to the sniper rounds that we have in today's Kroot. Basically, instead of being having the option for normal Kroot to shoot either as a rapid fire or as a sniper rifle. You had specialized hunting Kroot that had sniper rifles. Okay. Right, and so starting off with HQ, they had a Master Shaper, which was not very different than what it is today, but something worth noting is that Master Shapers and Shapers themselves could just take Kroot Hounds to accompany them. So you could have a Shaper, which was an independent character, and just have some Hounds following around with him, similar to how drones act with independent Tau characters today. Or instead of taking a Master Shaper, you could take a Shaper Council, which is just a bunch of Shapers. And a note on why they're called Shapers. Basically, Shapers are called Shapers because they shape the evolutionary trajectory of the Kroot. So if you were confused as to why that was, that's why. They're basically dietitians for the Kroot. The elite units are headhunters, which basically, let's see. Oh, right. So they can do poisoned attacks, basically. So they have poisoned close combat abilities. Then there are Stalker Kindreds, which do better in forests. So they have the ambush special rule, which was something that was outlined in Codex Catechins, if you remember that, or Catechins, depending on how you want to pronounce it. So the elite's options either were poisoned or were able to set up ambushes. The troop option was the standard Kroot Carnivore. The fast attack were the Vulture Kindreds, or Kroot Hawks, which they have a picture of here in a minute, but these are probably some of the most popular Kroot conversions that you'd ever see. They're basically Kroot with wings, so they're jump pack Kroot. Kroot Hound Pack is basically Kroot plus Kroot Hounds, so you have to have at least half as many Kroot Hounds as you do Kroot Warriors. And then there's a Tracker Kindred, which allow them to oh right, these are just Kroot on Narlox, so they have a little bit different rules because of that. But if you remember the Narlock riders from Forge World, this is what you could use them as, is Tracker Kroot. Then there's the Hunter Kindred, which have the sniper rifle, and those are heavy support. You can take a Kroot Ox Herd, which is just Kroot plus Kroot Ox, similar to the Kroot Hound Herd, or the Kroot Hound Pack. So you have to have half as many Kroot Ox to do normal Kroot. And then you have these Punji traps, which were traps that you could set on the battlefield and cause pinning and strength 4 hit. Cool. So, overall, just kind of a neat codex and a neat idea. Variations on the standard Kroot units that we have today. Either making them jump infantry or giving them sniper rounds, which at the time was novel, or just amplifying the number of Kroot Hounds or Kroot Ox that were in the unit. So not a lot of diversity there, ironically, considering the fluff, but still a Kroot army on its own, which is something quite fun. So here's the ideas that they had for like the Narlock riders at the time. So this is using the old Cold One body and a Kroot Ox head. And this is the Vulture Kroot or Kroot Hawk that would have the old Harpy wings. And then something else. So that was the Kroot entry. Something else that I think is pretty cool is that they had basically an FAQ for the Dark Angels army here. So it goes through a whole bunch of different errata that they're doing, because again their publication schedule was long enough that instead of putting out an actual publication or independent publication, they just addressed a lot of these issues here. So They say that these are official rolls, and they do things like making Terminators cheaper, down to 47 points at the time. So they do that errata, and then or that update, and then have a bunch of fluff on Dark Angels, which is pretty darn cool. Wrap up with an Inquisitor battle report, which was a specialty game, and then go into more product placement stuff, more advertising, which still is pretty cool when you look at it today, for nostalgia purposes, of course. All right, so here's the Harpy wings and all the different bits that you would need in order to make your Narlock riders. More high elves and dwarves that they used in the battle reports, and then upside down world with Lord of the Rings. Right? So pretty cool. Let me know what you guys think. If this is something that you want me to do in more or less detail for other White Dwarfs from that time period, please let me know. Otherwise, happy wargaming, and again, happy holidays.